Beautiful. Welcome back to a conversation with Ann Betz. And Ann is a neuroscientist now. She's really explored the after effects, if you like, of Landmark. And I think this is one of the beautiful things that Landmark does offer is that for myself, the mess I was left in really caused me to start looking and asking questions that I otherwise would never have thought to ask. So it's one of the bonuses.
Totally. And thank you. And, part of it is like, it's both distressing and completely fascinating. And I call myself a neuroscience translator because I'm not actually a PhD neuroscientist. And also I'm a generalist. I know a lot about a lot of things in neuroscience. I teach neuroscience. I teach at a university, but technically I don't call myself a neuroscientist. Just say I'm a really good translator of what's happening.
We need translators as well. I mean, we touched briefly on where you saw some of the material for today's conversation, and the papers, the PhD papers are just like, oh my God, there's so much hard work to actually go through and filter what it is that we need. So having somebody that can translate, you're really needed.
Yeah. And it's hard sometimes to be able to do that unless you have enough context to because then things stand out as important or not important. So if anybody, don't be hard on yourself. It really, you get good at translating this when you do it a lot.
Beautiful. And I'm going to touch on something that seems like a bit of a sideline, but the way that, I mean, in Landmark, they were really asking no questions about the company. That was in a way forbidden. We were told not to, and their connections with Scientology, for example. But Google didn't exist then. So then Google existed, and we had, well, this is, I think, a really interesting timeline to observe, because what's happening now with artificial intelligence, I mean, there is life after Google. Google, we would just put the words in and Google would come back with the answers. But now with artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of different types of services available that are all competing to be the next Google. But what it's causing is that we need to ask the questions of these machines, and based on our questions is the quality of the answers. So
yeah, you have to be able to discern, because I'll go in sometimes and I'll ask a neuroscience question, and I've got enough background to know is what AI has pulled together, does that feel right, or is it missing something or not? And I think for a lot of people, whatever question you ask, often we don't have enough background to know, because AI can only, and ChatGPT can only scan kind of, what it knows is out there. And you and I were talking about that a lot of the history of what we have here, it's almost like we have to go back to kind of the oral history days. We have to tell our stories. And that's why channels like yours are so important, because there isn't a sufficient written record of all of this, the impact and all of that. So we're kind of, paving new roads, exploring new territory.
Absolutely we are. And with the tools that we have now, however, based on the conversation that we're going to have today about the forking of different businesses that have stemmed from Landmark, which came from Scientology, which came from other methodologies.
Mind dynamics and,
hypnotism.
Napoleon Hill and
black magic. They're like the links.
Black magic, absolutely. Yeah. And ultimately, a psychopath, and I think it is very fair to call L. Ron Hubbard a psychopath with who may have also had some other neurodivergence like schizophrenia, who just made shit up. like what the heck? Xenu, the supreme ruler, and people being dropped into volcanoes. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, just dip your toe into some of the Scientology, books and podcasts and stuff like that, because at the highest ends of Scientology, they are taught something that is basically a science fiction movie. So, there's a craziness there. And I say that word actually not just saying, oh, it's crazy, but actually it's crazy. And it is the heritage, we are the legacy of that. If we go, and I find this really fascinating, Dale, to say, so in addition to being a neuroscience translator, I teach neuroscience, I am a professional coach. I'm an executive coach. I've worked as a life coach, and I've done that for over 20 years. And my profession has has roots that follow the same route. And what does this mean for human growth and development? Where did we all come from?
Yeah, beautiful, because this is what it stirred up in me, is I got really curious. And I was not that pre-landmark. I was just basically going through my day-to-day motions without thought or consideration for these bigger questions. So then, as you're speaking, I'm thinking sounds a little bit like a religion, because that's also what people from religion do. However, the sources here are so spread out. It's like a box of chocolates. We can go through and have a look at all these different flavors and see how they've come together. But that's a natural human spirit, is to be really curious. As children, that's what we do. We're kind of wandering around in the world, and we lose the curiosity. We wonder, how can we stand up? How can we touch things? What's hot? What's cold? Yeah.
Right.
And we lose that ability. And then I think Landmark for me sparked that again. And particularly the after Landmark, I got that that sense of wonder and curiosity. Like, where did this come from? How long has this been happening? Where did they get it from? All their different cultures and how they've kind of intertwined. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating subject. And now we have artificial intelligence that we can start asking questions. So even if from these conversations, if people start to look at what questions can we ask, and I just want to put one thing in here.
Yeah.
I had somebody that I did the Introduction Leaders program with for the second time, and we're still in contact. I let him know about these podcasts, and he said, somewhat related, on Monday, I was asking Meta AI about Kamala Harris and her use of landmark language. And this was the response, that Shyamala Gopalan, her mum, introduced EST to India. When I asked for more info, it claimed it was mistaken. So what the AI said in response to this question, we've got to ask the questions. EST, or Erhard Seminar Training, is a self-help program that was popular in the 1970s and 1980s. It was founded by Werner Erhard, and it focused on personal growth and transformation through a series of exercises, seminars, and workshops. Kamala Harris's connection to EST is through her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, who was a follower of the program. In fact, Gopalan was one of the first people to introduce EST to India, and she even translated EST materials into Tamil, her native language. There is no evidence to suggest that Kamala Harris herself was directly involved in EST or any of its seminars or workshops. However, her mother's involvement is very clear.
Yeah, so and certainly for something like language, that is going to have, an influence on a child. You're going to hear that. So that's really fascinating. And when it's not necessarily, good or bad, but to be able to understand where all the trails went, because one of the things that I think happened, and I know others have talked about this on this podcast and others, is that the 60 Minutes interview of Werner Erhard in 1990, fill in the blank, whatever year it was, really made people very much disconnect. It made Landmark disconnect. And I think it kind of, any other organization that had any connection was not going to be public about it because it wasn't going to look good. And so in my industry, the coaching industry, our very clear connections to Landmark and EST are not widely known. There was a woman who did her PhD thesis, and I don't remember the year she did it in, but we do have a link to an article that talks about this thesis. She was the first place I'd seen in any academic paper saying, hey, boom, here here are all of the influences on the field of professional coaching, life coaching, executive coaching, like that, not sports coaching, but this field. And, you know, here is the Werner Erhard connection. I had heard it because I was friendly with the founders of my coaching school. So I'd heard stories, but this was really validated when I saw her present at a conference and just lay it out. As well as some things I didn't know, other connections to other coaching schools. And I don't know this part I don't know. So please don't ding me for this because I don't know. This is an assumption that, you know, that's not widely known in the coaching world for two reasons. One, there's lots of influences and everybody wants to claim. Everybody wants to claim, no, it came from here, like that. But really, there's a big one that goes back to Landmark. And the second is, I think, that disconnection of anything having to do with Werner Erhard, because it's going to look really tainted.
Yeah, absolutely. We had, there was an Aboriginal runner in the Olympic Games who won gold medals, and Landmark claimed her success to their participating in their work. And so they were saying that at one point, and then there was a message that came through. It was like, we're not allowed to say that anymore. So she heard about it and she's just like, no, don't associate with that. Like, yeah. And particularly when you're talking about the disassociation, it's for the coaching programs that are not going well. Landmark doesn't want them to be referenced as a source there either.
Well, and I think, I don't know, you know, I was thinking about from the perspective of the coaching programs, maybe not wanting to be associated. I don't know about Landmark's view on this, but coaching is another way to come at some of the very, very similar results. But it is in a very different context, a very different container that is protected by things like an ethical system. And I can talk about how that depends. I mean, it really depends. But so there's, I mean, I've been doing this for 23 years. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think that it was clean. And I can talk about sort of, depending on what you want to hear about tonight in coaching, sort of what is the structure that keeps it from being exploitative? When is it exploitative? What are the things that are kind of heritage Landmark that I don't like? But for the most part, because it's not a large group awareness training, it's one-on-one work. And there is a way of working with people that, when it is done according to the teaching and the ethical system and the competencies of our international governing body, it's not exploitative. So
really interesting. So a few things that crop up for me when you're saying that is that, one, Landmark at the time was not very expensive. You know, it's $350 for 3 days and 1 evening. And they would often say, we provide great value. If you go, and Tony Robbins was the comparison.
Who also came from Landmark, So Tony, you know, absolutely. I don't know what his interaction was, but I do know he also has a very similar organization that matches many of the things we're uncomfortable with in large group awareness trainings. So yes. I'm sure he had other influences as well, but Landmark was part of it.
Absolutely. Okay. And as you were speaking, I'm thinking, so the comparison would be made, Tony Robbins, go and do a course with him. It's like, and people would go and see the price. It was like $10,000. It was, you know, compared to $350, the investment was dramatically different. And therefore, I wonder if Landmark, the way the company was organized, got away with little practices that people were uncomfortable with, but it's kind of like, oh, but you know, it's only $350.
Right. So, and it's a weekend. And you're going to tell me in a weekend, or back in the day when I did, it was 2 weekends. because but then later it was a weekend and this amazing, you're going to transform your life and it's not this long-term thing. Well, one of the things I know from neuroscience is the brain doesn't work that way. And our thought patterns don't work that way. You can give it a potential. You can give it some new things to think about and disrupt some habits and patterns. But in terms of, how we process and how we think, that you're probably really familiar with this, most people are, there's a term called neuroplasticity, and it's how the brain wires itself, and it wires itself to what it is experiencing. And so, and a weekend is not enough to, at least at this point with the technology we have, it's not enough to rewire your whole brain. It just doesn't. It at most can help you go, oh, I think I should go in that direction. This direction maybe isn't working, and I have some more awareness. I've brought things that were below the surface more into conscious awareness through these processes, but it will not take you all the way there. There is no way. And I think that is why John Hunter says in his work that the transformative feeling does not last. Of course it doesn't last. We have to go rewire it. We have to practice it. We have to try and fail. And eventually you do it long enough, yeah, you can rewire your way to a new reality for yourself, but not in a weekend. There's no way.
That's right. And then, but it does explain the intensity, the don't leave the room. It's like, while we've got you here, you're going to absorb as much of this content as we can possibly pour into your brain before.
And we're going to make you feel like you've had transformation, even though it's not real.
And then giving the examples, like people that do stand up and they physically alter. Once the secrets are out and they've said something that has never been said before out in the world, but to a large group of people, then there's an example. It's like, oh, wow, they change. It's like, that's possible for you too, if you dig deep. So they've thought through the ways of making this glimpse of transformation a possibility for people to want more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually think that's kind of maybe one of the really kind of very sweet things about it. It just, I feel like often things are overpromised because it's not, it's kind of like, well, anyway, you can have the awareness, but full on, you have to live it. And that's where I think you get into the ongoing programs and the ongoing patterning, and you spend 10 years there and you've wired a different way of thinking there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, because I mentioned how you were talking about the forking, the different things that have come out of Landmark. And I'm just wondering if you want me to be a little more specific about, many people are aware of coaching in a positive way these days. Not everybody has a positive view of it. But there's a lot of executive coaching, life coaching. People are sort of, you might know someone who's a coach and like that. And I am not, I want to say, and I've said this to Dale, the whole history of coaching and every influence is not my expertise, but I can talk about a few things that, about the early days. And so, and the connection to Landmark. And is that a good place to go, Dale, at this point? Okay. So a couple of very, very influential coaches. So coaching emerged 30 years ago-ish, 30, 35 years ago, somewhere in there, as a distinct profession. It's distinct from sports coaching. And it's really helping people find their own answers, live a resonant life, very similar to what, you're hoping people find in a large group awareness training. There were two, and there are more, but there are two particularly influential coaching schools who were saying, we need to teach people how to do this. It might seem like it's intuitive, but it's actually really not. There's a skill set there. So what are we doing and how are we going to teach people to do this? And the one that I'm very familiar with, because I used to work for them, is called the Coactive Training Institute. Used to be the Coaches Training Institute, CTI. And then another one that was very influential, particularly in the early days of coaching, was one called Coach U. Coach U was founded by a man named Thomas Leonard, who's people in the coaching world very familiar with him. He's considered very influential. The Coactive Training Institute was founded by Laura Whitworth, Henry Kimsey House, and Karen Kimsey House, a husband and wife, and then Laura Whitworth. Laura and Thomas Leonard worked for Werner Erhard and Associates. They worked in the accounting department. Thomas hired Laura. Now, interestingly, and I'm always really struck by Ann talking about some of the illness, and this is not a blame the victim or anything like that. They're both passed on now. Thomas died at 47 of a heart attack, really young, 2004, I think it was. And Laura, I actually can't remember the year, but I want to say she was maybe in her 50s and she died of cancer. The other two founders are still alive and they've retired now. But the influence that they kind of brought with them, and there are other places, there are other like significant connections, major well-known people in the coaching industry. Another coaching school is called the Newfield Network. They were founded by Julio Olaya. Julio Olaya was I think kind of it was very connected to or worked for Fernando Flores. They were philosophers and they were very friendly with Werner. I don't know all of the connections there other than back in the day when I was involved, he was always talking about Fernando Flores and Julio Olaya and a lot of language work that they had done. Well, Julio also founded a coach training school. All three of these coach training schools still exist and do good training. They actually do pretty good training. I prefer Newfield and the Coactive Training Institute because I think that Coach U does lighter training. I don't think their training is as robust, but it's not bad training and it's not done in an LGAT way, but it has landmark roots. And there's some other ones too. Tim Galway, a lot of people, this is the last thing, and then I will see what questions you have, but a lot of people also source coaching, the inner game of tennis as being a very influential idea and book, that it wasn't just about what you're doing, but what you're thinking and your limiting beliefs. That's my very, very loose understanding of that book. And Tim Galway's was Werner Erhard's tennis coach for a time. So, and there's some other connections there as well. But
and Lifespring. What's Lifespring?
Oh, okay. Well, let me say one other thing about the coaching thing, and then we'll go to Lifespring. So because I just have to share this personal part. So I left Landmark. I was about 27, 28. I'd been there for about 9 or 10 years. I didn't do anything in personal development for 10 years because I was so burnt out and stressed and confused. And there weren't these podcasts or the internet. I didn't know how to make sense of it, so I just turned my back on it. Well, I had someone helped me find this idea of personal coaching as a potential career. I needed to understand what my career would be. And I walked in and I thought, well, let me check it out. I'm not going to sign up for the whole thing because goodness knows this could be another crazy thing. So I signed up for one weekend and I walked in and literally I would say within about half an hour, I thought this feels familiar, but they're really nice. That is exactly what I thought, Dale. This feels just like an EST seminar, but there's no edge and the leaders don't have an edge. This is the same kind of questions and exploration, but it is so kind. And that's what had me stay. I was home again, but I was home with a nicer family. Okay, so that's the coaching thing.
Okay, and then Lifespring.
Okay, I'm not an expert here, other than that my business partner, as I've been going through all of this, my business partner of over 20 years, also a coach, I know part of her background is she did Lifespring. And so we're just like, oh my goodness, like let's process everything. And she was not as involved as I was because she was a young mom and was super like busy, but she did do some things and she did do assisting. And basically and this is what I know from also some of the podcasts. And there are people who know a lot more about this. So I'm going to say what I have heard and then turn it over there for that conversation to continue. Lifespring was very much, very, very much like Landmark. I don't know how they got away with it. And I don't remember the name of the founder. It didn't last. I don't know why, but it was, again, a very similar large group awareness training. Ursula remembers crawling under the chairs to line the pencils up just so. And a lot of the stuff that I say about what I went through, she's like, we had that as well. And this is what I've heard. It was very, very, very similar to Landmark. Now, what's been interesting about Lifespring that I've heard is that folded. And I don't know how long it went for, somewhere maybe 10 years, something like that. Others may know more. Now, the troubled teen industry, which is now also very much under fire. The troubled teen industry is like when they kidnap kids and take them away to kind of make them behave, right? I think we want to look at, I think there's an HBO special or HBO series about this. That is Lifespring that has really infiltrated that industry. And apparently there have been lots of things that have used the Lifespring version of things because they're not around anymore. So there's nobody there to sue anybody to do that. So that's about all I know about Lifespring, but it was basically just it was a Landmark clone from what I understand.
Beautiful.
Or very similar.
Great. So these were from how long ago? What year?
Gosh, I
Around
don't know. So
approximately?
Ursula would have done Lifespring, 25 years ago. So probably around then, 1990, late 90s, maybe.
Okay.
And I don't know the history of how it developed. I'm sure somebody out there does know that because it's, like I said, there's an awareness that Lifespring was an offshoot of Landmark.
Yeah. So there's I've done the same. Like I've walked into a group and like, this person has definitely done Landmark. There's just the registration process, particularly, I did ayahuasca in Peru, and so I was going to sit in a little hut and do this medicine, and there was a group there, and the woman was wanting to coerce me. She was like a young girl, 19 or 20 or something. If you don't register now, and I'm just like, stop, just stop. I know where that comes from, and I'm not interested.
I'm onto your tricks.
Yeah, that's right. I'm onto your tricks. Absolutely. Why I'm saying that is because I wonder, if you look back into the 90s, the smaller businesses, I think, are regulated. There are organizations, it became an industry. Whereas Landmark, when it arrived, was not part of any industry. So it got away with being unregulated. There's kind of an anarchy.
It kind of didn't fit anywhere.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking, one of the things that you asked me in getting ready for this is kind of what are the things in coaching that do kind of follow some of this. And, I was really thinking about it, and I was thinking, for the most part, because we have an ethical system that in order to keep my credential, I have to agree to and I have to follow. And if I work with you one-on-one and I do something unethical, there is a credentialing body you can report me to and they will investigate. So that's something that's kind of cool. It's also part of what we are taught is people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. That comes from Carl Rogers, I believe, originally. And it is not my job as a coach to tell anybody what to do. I'm not coaching them toward anything. Not if I'm a real coach, not if I'm a credentialed coach, professional through this credentialing organization called the International Coach Federation. Now, ton of people out there calling themselves coaches that are doing all sorts of bad stuff. So I really believe in make sure your coach has a credential and they follow an ethical system, and because otherwise, who knows what you're getting. So when I was thinking about like what is the same, I will say mostly things that were useful for me that I got out of the forum, which was like the ability to look at something in a different way, right? Or the ability to recognize negative self-talk and understand that just because I think that doesn't mean I am that. You know, some of these things are also very much part of coaching. The one thing that troubles me that I think has come into the coaching world is still there, comes out of these large group awareness trainings and is not healthy, is this idea of absolute personal responsibility. And not every coach has that or does that, but it's kind of an underlying thing. Like, you know, what about you? And what are you getting out of this? And this kind of like, there are no victims. And when I coach a lot of coaches because I'm very known in the coaching field. So I coach a lot of coaches. And one of the things that I have to really help them with is unlearning that programming. That you can be victimized. Doesn't mean you have victim consciousness and you're going to go into, oh, poor me, and not take responsibility for anything. But they take responsibility for things that are not their responsibility. And that drives me crazy. And it's just not accurate in terms of how humans are. We are not we can take a new perspective, we can learn from things. But unless we start acknowledging that there are perpetrators who get a kick out of controlling and taking money from people and things like that, and no, maybe you didn't cause a fight with someone, maybe they were abusing you, until we recognize that there are other people actually out there doing things, I think we get actually stuck in the development process. So I'm curious what you think of that.
Yeah, really, really interesting. There's a couple of things. I mean, our first conversation is the fruit of the poisonous tree.
Right.
And that's where I'm coming from with
Yeah.
the foundations. Without having a clear path of where these types of training have come from. And it could be, you know, people who were just freely exploring. It could be people that were perpetrating and wanting control, which I think a lot of it is. They're using groups to maintain a level of control, which is really unhealthy, and looking for people that are easily swayed. So then the fruits of the poisonous tree.
Well, I have another legal term that I might throw in here.
Yeah,
Cui bono.
Cui bono, follow the money. Follow the money.
No, cui bono, who benefits?
Yeah, so I translate that as
it's to follow the money.
Follow the money.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense too. But I think about when I was thinking about this whole thing about who benefits from this idea that even if you're raped or, you know, stolen from, somehow it's your responsibility. Who benefits from that? Abusers benefit from that. And abusive systems benefit from that. So, you know, if I'm working all the hours that are possible and, you know, trying to meet my enrollment targets or whatever it is, and I'm exhausted and I can't, you know, and I say, you know, God, I'm not going to do it. Well, you're not keeping your word. Who benefits from that? Not me, the system.
Yes.
And when I go back to, you know, I was talking about L. Ron Hubbard being, you know, who knows what his diagnosis would be, and he's dead now. or Werner Erhard, and we don't know, and it's not my place to diagnose, but there are narcissistic characteristics. And narcissism is not a diagnosis, by the way, it's a description. It's like calling somebody introverted or extroverted. It's okay to say they're narcissistic. I'm not going to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder. It's okay to say there's some narcissistic traits there. And if so much of what we have comes from systems that are toxic, the systems are creating beliefs that benefit the system.
Mhm.
And where it gets so messy for me, Dale, is there's enough truth, right? There's like a little bit, there's some truth to that. It doesn't work to be a total victim of life and to be like, oh, I don't know, life just happens and I have nothing and I can't do anything. And like, that's not healthy either. But I think what we're missing is you can't go all the way to the other side. There is what I would call an integration. On the one hand, there are things that I can be responsible for, and living that way gives me some power and some freedom. On the other hand, there is a certain reality to life.
Mm.
And I can be victimized without deciding I'm a victim and can't do anything with my life. But if I've been victimized, I need different healing than just somebody yelling at me or telling or saying to me, how were you part of that? And that happened to me at 18 years old in a seminar after the Landmark Forum, where I talked about sexual abuse and I was told that I created it and what was going on with me and what did I get out of it. And that screwed up my healing for years, because nobody said to me, God, honey, that shouldn't have happened to you. That's not okay. You were taken advantage of by somebody older than you, and that's not okay. And what do you need?
And how to identify that possibility happening again. And so there's just so much in what you're talking about, which is the perpetrators, and also, wow, and it's horrible that happened, right? It's shaped and what
I'm
we're
not
talking about.
alone, though.
I know.
I'm not, I thank you, and I don't mean to brush it off. It's horrible that happened. And I internalized it. And I walked in the world with that view until much, much later in therapy, where a good therapist said that was wrong. And I was like, mind blown, not my fault. Okay, now I can start the process of actually healing.
Healing. Yes, that's right. And so there's so much. So with the perpetration, there's never report that to the police. Or did you report that to the police? Right. So it's like they're their own world. They're creating new laws that is internalized and not part of the society that we live in, where we have these regulators, we have police force, we have systems that can nurture us through these experiences. There's never any reference to that. It's actually more like letting the perpetrator off the hook.
And then
bring them into the forum so that they can talk about it.
Forgive them, go call them, enroll them in the forum. And this is the pressure to do that. And this is a person I don't feel safe with. And the pressure is forgive and, take responsibility and bring them into the fold. Because if we report them to the
large
police.
group. Oh man, this is so rich. So, and there's also, like in this large group, there's often somebody who was a perpetrator that can hear their side of the story, and they can come up with their sharing of their experience of why they went where they went. And then it's kind of like you get this different view. So it's so confusing because it's not relying on Landmark to solve the problem.
Well, I really like what you said. It's like a world unto itself. And I think that really is part of the feeling that I had, the us and them, the feeling that I was told that I was one of the transformed now at 18. You know, I'm now transformed and I'm one of the elite. And that is definitely the message that comes across, and the rest of the world are just kind of, in Scientology, they called them wogs. The world that didn't do Scientology, we didn't have a word that I remember in Landmark, but it was the same sort of feeling that, and my job is bring you into the fold so you can be one of the enlightened. But there's a real us and them, and it's made me very, for me, that's one of my tip-offs for any sort of any group where it's like, now I'm of the knowing ones. I will run very far from that, because that's not my experience with humans. You know, humans are wise and stuck, and we all have our blind spots. We all have things we're not aware of. You know, there isn't an elite class that's transformed in another class that isn't. It just is, no matter how many years you spent in Landmark, it just isn't like that. You
So we
know,
didn't have a term for the people who had not graduated, but we had graduates. So
yeah,
anybody that had
yeah,
graduated, that was a differentiation.
that's,
That's a
yeah, for
separate
sure.
point of separation. So I'm kind of, it's rattling through my brain. I wonder, because of the way that people get involved in these large groups, and because there's no repercussions either. So there's no consequences from Landmark's world if somebody was raped, for example, and they don't report it. There's no skin off Landmark's back. They don't have any repercussions.
In fact, in the organization, if they sort of share it and they talk about, then they're sort of forgiven. It's like a anyway,
Catharsis,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it's like, wow, that's all you need to do. You just
Yeah.
need to share about it. You don't need to call that person to fight, like, not to get, well, you kind of get their worldview and then it's okay, but it's not okay. You know, I
We
had,
would go, keep going.
so I had an experience with my center manager where I finally, for the very first time in my life ever, shared about my mother leaving pedophiles in my bedroom. And it was a huge thing to acknowledge. It's just like, so getting it out of my brain into the world. And the center manager said, well, what about your mother? I was just like, what? How do you think your mother felt? And I was just like, excuse me? And then I'm like, well, I can't go there. So we just suppressed it all again.
Well, you're not getting the uptake you need. And so you learn, as a sensitive being, you learn what Ed Werner used to say, there's no cheese down that tunnel, and right?
Yeah, that's right. So I was like, just don't go there, because then I'd have
You
to.
don't go there. There's no point to. I was remembering that, I think I mentioned last time that when I met someone and we got married, because this view was you can marry anybody, it didn't matter. And he was really emotionally abusive. He was probably on the narcissism scale I now see. Not a well person, most likely emotionally abusive. We stayed married for about 4 years. That was one of the reasons that I left, is I was sort of like, he's still into it. I'll just let him have that world. I will go somewhere else, because I don't want to be anywhere near him. So that was a piece of why I didn't continue it. 26, 27, somewhere in there. He went on and did various things. And so every so often I would get, I don't know if he was doing like self-expression and leadership or something. And I'd get this damn email that would be like, I really want to complete with you. And can we talk? And I'd just be like, you are the last person on this earth that I trust to have any sort of conversation, because all you ever did was manipulate and control me. And I'm not gonna like give you that satisfaction. But he was being pushed to, you're incomplete with your ex-wife. And I was like, I'm not going to do this just so you can feel better or feel like you did what they wanted you to at Landmark. No.
And more than likely end up with an invitation to do a seminar
Oh, I'm sure that
or
ultimately, please come
something
back. And,
to
I'm
repair
sure there
and
was
complete.
I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds really kind of cruel, but I didn't trust him. He had never showed me that he was worthy of trust and that it would be any sort of reasonable conversation. It just felt like part of the drill.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
so I,
that's what happened to me as well. I started to see people in the center looking at the clones, and it's like there's no people. There's no personality in there. It's landmark language. And I mentioned this briefly with Anne, and I'd like to explore this a little bit more as well over time. There becomes a parent-child relationship. Landmark becomes the parent, and we're the children. We were the children that were being trained in our behavior, in how to communicate with others. So they were the source that we would go to learn to become mature individuals that could fit into the world. But the dynamics, and like bringing the parents in, our parents in, so then we both became the children. We were more on an even keel. So then the parent is landmark. And there was
that's
always
really,
a hook into us developing our relationship, but relying on them as the parent to be the solution.
well, and you're making me think of a couple of things here because I think this is a really interesting perspective because number one, that's the source of approval. And for a child, approval is life. Approval is, absolutely survival. And then I'm also thinking about the patterns of roles in families where one of the parents is, where one or both are narcissists. And what you get is you get the golden child, the neglected child, the scapegoat. There are a few others, the helper, like that, but the big ones are the golden child and the scapegoat. And it was super clear in Landmark, the way to be the golden child is enroll a lot of people and you could do no wrong and you could get away with just about anything. But God forbid you weren't doing that, then your feet are going to be held to the fire. You're not going to be treated as kindly. You're not going to have the same benefits, etc. You're the scapegoat. So that makes sense.
Yes, so this parent-child dynamic, and by the way, I see narcissists like giving them this title like there's something fancy. They're just little kids throwing tantrums, wanting to get their way. That's it. They're toddlers lying down on the floor with their hands going, that's it. Don't give them any special clinical name. They're little toddlers throwing a tantrum, full stop. And
They
that's what
are.
it was like.
Unfortunately, as they're throwing the tantrum and you're in a relationship with them, it's like giving a toddler a knife, I do think that's right. I just think I have never seen, I work with people recovering from narcissistic abuse. It's one of my areas of specialty. And it's what got me into looking at cults. And it's part of what helps me understand this because they're all run by narcissists. And I have never seen anything do as much damage to a human's well-being as being around a narcissist in the family, in the workplace, or in an intimate relationship. You can be in a relationship with one for a couple of years. It will take probably double that to feel like you've recovered.
And this is exactly the recovery after Landmark as well.
Yeah. Probably
Interesting.
double the years. That
At
makes
least,
sense.
yeah. So my mother was a narcissist.
Oh,
So,
you know the world very well. Yes.
but what's interesting is that this is why I kind of gave over I allowed Landmark to have so much authority over me because it was like, I've got my parent now who can actually teach me how to live in the world because that was missing from my mother.
Yeah.
And it was like when I talk about why I'm interested in this self-regulation, because that is the world of a narcissist. There's then the unspoken agreements. It's like a law unto itself. It's a form of anarchy. Like I've got into governance, and it's a form of anarchy where their code is law. This is how we work together, and this is how it's established. And as soon as you start agreeing, then that becomes more cemented, or it becomes really hard to get out of. That's for
I
sure.
think
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I had
You,
this
yeah, go ahead.
familiarity around that world. So stepping into Landmark, it was like I had somebody, a parent, who could actually guide me to be more socially acceptable, because that was really missing for me. I'd never even known, that there were social skills I was missing. I had never questioned it.
Trying to pattern yourself on a mother who wasn't there. Well, and I think one of the things I said about the early days of Landmark for me was it was the first place I have narcissism in my family as well. And it was the first place I felt like anybody saw me and asked about me, right? And that was really seductive. And I remember I was going to college at the time. I'd gone to New York to go to college, and I was going into the New York area center to do seminars, and then I started volunteering, and I was supposed to be doing an internship in New York, and then I just ended up spending all of my time at the New York area center and then ended up going on staff. And I remember talking to my advisor, and she just didn't get it. And I said, but you don't understand. This is the place where I feel like they really get me. And her response was, was like, why is that so important? And I, numerous times it took me, and this is not anybody's fault. This is not me going, I'm a victim, but there was an influence. It took me until age 30 to get my bachelor's degree. And I went in and out of college. And every time the thing that pulled me out was Landmark, because it was more rewarding than going to college and studying algebra or whatever I had to do. And I kept diverting. And instead of doing the work I needed to do for me in my life, I went there. And that's me. That was my choice. That was, I'm not saying Landmark did that. However, it was also encouraged. We need you, and,
Highly, highly
and how,
encouraged. Yeah, because when
how
you're
am I
putting yourself, in a new environment, you're going to need more social skills to be able to integrate with those. And who better than Landmark to assist you with that?
Well, and how am I supposed to go full-time to college and support myself? Because my family did not really help me. And so I had to make enough money to, rent an apartment and all of that, and do the Introduction to the Forum Leaders program, which is, I don't know how many hours a week that is, right? And assist at seminars and forums on the weekend. Something's got to give. And it was school for
Yeah,
me.
yeah. And that's this thing about drawing people into their little world. One of the greatest things that provided relief for me when I left was I spoke with somebody who said, "Oh, Landmark, they're so small, don't worry about it. They're hardly making a
Oh,
dent in the world." And that I was like, what do you mean? Because until that point, they were it. And then when I started looking at just the logistics of it, but then I still could hear in these groups the Landmark way had infiltrated. But I wonder. So one question, we're not going to come anywhere near the answers to these today. But what I'm really curious about with this, the fruit of the poisonous tree, is it because we at that time, you in your time, me in mine, that we didn't push back, that we didn't question it, that we didn't seek outside counsel, that this now persisted because it was acceptable, it was condoned. And now we have this world where it's completely out of control. So
yeah.
and I think this is now why it was really important to start talking, because these are really important conversations to be having. And if we don't step in and say, that's not okay, that has to be regulated, or there has to be an external source that can assist us through this exit, then it's going to continue. So that's what having
Right.
to really speak out.
Yeah. I think I have a couple of thoughts about it. And I don't know that any one is the answer. Why didn't we speak out? Well, um, it's really interesting listening to Sarah Edmondson on the podcast, A Little Bit Culty, and talking about the her Nexium. experience. And one of the things they're really good about is making it clear you don't have to be screwed up to get involved with a toxic system, but it helps. But I want to say it also helps. And in my, in my experience with people in the personal development world, and I could say there's research in a related field, but it's really probably more common than not that people have had some kind of family system challenges. Because one of the things that we develop is some people, not everyone, but some people develop higher levels of empathy. Why would you need higher levels of empathy or awareness, sensitivity, which is part of empathy? Well, because if you're living with an alcoholic father, you need to know, is he safe or not? And so I think we get our systems very tuned to that kind of thing, which makes us want to be helpers, and want to go into these fields. So it's not just that we're looking to heal our own wounds. I think that is part of it. That was part of it for me. But I think it's also being drawn to it because we just feel other people's pain as well, and we want to help. So I think it's both that creates that. And then I think, as like I said, as Sarah and Nippy point out, you can also just be looking for more effectiveness as an actor or, better business skills and get sucked in. So I think all of that. One more factor that I find really fascinating, and I would love to see research on this, is age. So Brian, remind us the name of his podcast, Brian and Eric. They're doing a really good podcast too, and they give you shout outs. Brian and Eric are doing another really good, maybe we'll find it and put it in the show notes, really good Life After Landmark podcast. How Did I Get Here? I think it's called, is it called How Did I Get Here? How Do We Get Here? Something like that. He was really young when he got involved. Eric was 15. Brian, I think, was 18. I was 18. Brains are not fully developed. So when you're looking, and I don't know what percentage of people come into large group awareness trainings at a stage, and I would say it's anywhere under age 28, and become very gung-ho because this is just part of their development. And what is happening with the wiring in the brain is different than with older adults. Now, the place where you really see this is Scientology, that they really use children. In fact, their view is there are really no children, just young little adults. And so a lot of the leaders in Scientology started when they were very young. You can implant or manipulate or brainwash children more easily than adults. I don't know. I'm not saying there's any evidence that the people who became very, very involved in Landmark were younger, and therefore more, manipulable. But I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't skew a little in that direction. I don't know, Dale, what do you think?
Well, I'm not so sure about the chronological age. It's more for me, the way I see it is it's the level of maturity. So there are, some people that haven't matured that are still ripe. It's the state of the brain when it's ready to receive. That doesn't matter about the chronological age is not important. When it's ready for a shift, then the information is absorbed like a sponge.
Yeah. And maybe, I just want to say there might be an impact of chronological age as well.
Also, yeah, and that's what I was just about to say, is that obviously with young children, they don't have a history to have to negate, basically. So they're easier, it's prime,
it's less
more primal.
It's less. So what's happening in young adulthood, I don't remember if I said this last time, but so forgive me if I've said this before, stop me if I've heard this before.
No, we need to hear
But
again.
what's happening in young adulthood and in development and in our teenage years is I like to think of the brain of young adults as being really bushy. It's got all of these neural potentials. And, one of the things they found is if you want to learn a new language, before 9 is when there's like, my son learned, we moved to Costa Rica and my son learned Spanish in 6 months. We lived there for 4 years. My Spanish was never as good as his because he had those language neurons were still available. They hadn't been pruned away. And so everything that's happening in terms of who you're going to be as an adult, a major thing that's happening in young adulthood is your neural pathways are going to say, do we need this one or not? Where should we put the energy? Where is the reward? Who are we going to be? And that's why doing things like, working with children on their young adults on their values and things like that is so critical because it wires in a somewhat different way than when we're older. And so I do think, there's a mechanism where basically this big bushy anything is possible neurons, as you get into your 20s, it's like, oh, we don't need those anymore. So we're just going to put all the energy down this neural pathway. Now, for me, with Landmark, what I recognize is I have integrity, good or bad, wired in a way that happened when I was 18, 19, like hard wired, because that's what I was around. That's what I was being told. I was not taught that in my family. But at 18, I came into this organization and it is a non-negotiable for me. And even to the point of like, I've had to learn how to give myself grace and how to, be more discerning around even keeping my word. But that's part of what I think is happening are those messages are just like, yes, important message, get rid of anything else in our brains at that age.
So funny. So after our last conversation, I promised you the little promo materials and I didn't deliver. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, but this is with somebody that's got integrity and I'm going to get, and then I just gave it up. I was like, oh my God, just let her know that you're not going to do it. Okay, cool, I'm not going to do it, but I will do it this time. But
Yeah.
it's that, it ate
I
into
totally
me.
get it.
Like it kept me awake. There was a point when
Yes.
you commented and I was like, oh my God, Anne, I didn't do that. So
Oh, I know.
I know, but it's like it's part of my program now.
Yes.
And it's really difficult to understand that people don't see this.
It actually, when I came out of Landmark, it sort of freaked me out that people didn't operate that way. Now, I think there's a calibration to it. I like at this point, like somebody has to really not keep their word to me like 3, 4, 5 times before I get upset about it. Like it does not, I don't even care. I do not even care. It's not that anymore at all, because there's a way in which it can become toxic. It's like any sort of medicine that you take, there's you take vitamin A, for example, you take vitamin A, which is I believe, not water soluble. And so you take a certain amount, it's really good and helps your eyesight and all of that. You take too much, you can poison yourself. And I think about, even this, like being able to be more flexible and discerning about the idea of integrity, because there were times where I promised to do something and it didn't, my health was being compromised, but I said I would do it. Or I got into it and realized I don't like this. No part of me wants to do this. But because I said, and I have had to learn how to be just a better communicator about that and have open conversation about it.
That's it. And also to not take it personally. I'm just like, okay, if somebody has promised something to me and they're not delivering or whatever, it's just like, okay, I can see why this is not working for you. That's fine. Do I want to be involved? That's basically how's it going to affect me? I've got some choice around that. So I can keep my distance or or communicate in a way. So I've got some choice around that, which is really cool.
I love
And
that.
look, we're already, it's 1:15. We've been
Oh
here
my
for
God,
an
do we need to
hour
wrap
again
up?
already. And we haven't touched on, there's some really cool things that I wanted to talk about as far as the forks are concerned. But thank you for wiring together the initial forks, because I think they're really important. And again, I come back to people then let these organizations get away with it. And with the Nixium, I was horrified to see that it had got to the point of actually branding people's bodies, women's bodies. And that's what got me. It was like, wow, had I been louder when I first came out, had I connected with other people and really raised these issues, could that have prevented it? And even now, talking about it now, it's like, how can we steer this ship into a different direction to have people being more aware of the perpetrators? What's required there? I have no idea, but at least being in the conversation, asking the questions, I think is a place to start.
Yeah, I do too, because I think different things light up for different people. And, you know, it is really complex. And
Mm,
especially, it's one thing to look at like the Jonestown cult, or the one where they all thought they were going away in spaceships and killed themselves. It's like saying, okay, those people. But when you look at something like an LGAT, it wasn't all bad.
that's
It really
right.
wasn't. It
Mhm.
wasn't all bad. It wasn't, they weren't telling me to give them all my money. I didn't have to wear funny clothes, but at the same time, it's not the optimal way to work with human beings and to have human beings grow. And I've been talking to John Hunter, who did some really, really good neuroscience work around dopamine and the kind of high that people get. And one of the things that John has been saying that he's really questioning and curious about is, how do we, if we do want to grow as human beings, and that's the pull for Nexium, and that's the pull for Landmark, and that's the pull for coaching. If we do want to grow, how do we do it in ways that are really in align, don't like distress people's nervous systems, and actually are fun and are, open, and don't create an us and them. And why did we get this view that the only way to have people grow is be really mean to them? Because I will tell you, I don't grow that way. I grow out of kindness. Let me just share a little example of this, because I think this is so sweet. So when Noah, my son, was little, we had this book called Frog and Toad. And Frog and Toad were these little characters. And Frog, they both plant a garden. Each one of them plants a garden. And Frog goes out to his garden and he plays the violin and he sings to the plants and he tells the plants they're beautiful. And Toad goes out to his garden and he yells at his garden. And, the moral of the story is Frog's garden grows, Toad's garden doesn't. And I think that sums up the LGAT industry. Thank you very much.
Really
We don't
beautiful.
have to, you
Mm.
don't have to shock people. It actually is counterproductive. What works is love and kindness, and anything not done out of love is not okay with me. Not at this point.
Mhm. Beautiful way to end this conversation today. Really lovely, and there's still so much more to talk about. As
Absolutely.
far as like to the extremes, Nixium is one. The orgasmic meditation group is another. Yeah, so there's that to talk about as well. And I have a really interesting example of how somebody really took Landmark's work to an extreme. So we can talk
Okay.
about it. Yeah, we're scheduled to speak again next week.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
so we
Sounds
can
good.
open that up then. But great, thank you. It's an
Thank you.
absolute
Always,
pleasure. Yeah, and
always a
this
pleasure.
is one of the beautiful things. It's our common ground that's connected you and I on other sides of the planet, and developing it's like this level of communication, I say level, but this way of communicating with people that have participating in Landmark's work is so different, because we can go into these zones that, take a long time generally to get with other people. But it's really beautiful being able to
I
share with
think that was one of my takeaways from I was really into the communication workshop. And I think the ability to, a good thing, and, maybe it's good to say a good thing about Landmark, but I really did learn I could instantly connect with anyone. And that has been a blessing in my life.
Yes.
And, so let's sort the wheat from the chaff. Let's keep the gold and get rid of the toxic.
And end
help.
on a high note. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
So we'll see you next week. Thanks everyone for listening.
Absolutely.